Membership Drive by Murray F. Yaco, originally published in Amazing, July 1960. Narrated by Tom Trussel. 30 million miles out, Keita began monitoring the planet's radio and television networks. He kept the vigil for 2 sleepless days and nights, then turned off the receivers and began a systematic study of the notes he had taken on English idioms and irregular verbs. 12 hours later, convinced that there would be no language difficulty, he left the control room, went into his cabin, and fell into bed. He remained there for 16 hours. When he awoke, he walked to a locker at the end of his cabin, opened the door, and carefully selected clothing from a wardrobe that was astonishing both for its size and variety. For headdress, he selected a helmet that was not too different in design from the space helmets he had viewed on a number of television programs. It would disappoint no one, Keita reflected happily, as he took a deep breath and blew an almost imperceptible film of dust from the helmet's iridescent finish. Trousers and blouse were little more of a problem, but finally a compromise on items of a distinct military cut. Both were black and unembellished, providing, he hoped, an ascetic, spiritual tone to temper the military aura. Boots were no problem at all. The black and silver pair he wore every day were, by happy coincidence, a synthesis of the cowboy and military footgear styling he had observed hour after weary hour on the pickup panel in the control room. He placed the helmet carefully on his head, took time to make sure that it did not hide too great a portion of his impressively high forehead, then walked leisurely to the control room. In the control room, he checked the relative position of 2 green lights on the navigation panel, shut off the main drives, clicked the view screen up to maximum magnification, and took over the manual controls. A little less than 2 hours later, at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, he landed smoothly and quietly near the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. Watching from a port in the airlock, Keita was impressed with the restraint of the reception committee. Obviously, the entire city had been alerted several hours before his arrival. Now, only orderly files of military equipment could be seen on the city's streets, converging cautiously toward the gleaming white hull and its lone occupant. He opened the airlock and stepped out on a small platform which held him a full 100 feet above the grass-covered park. He watched as an armored vehicle approached within shouting distance, then stopped. Telling himself that it was now or never, he raised both arms to the sky, a gesture which spoke eloquently, he hoped, of peace, friendship, and trust. Later that afternoon, behind locked doors and sitting somewhere near the middle of an enormous conference table, Keita nonchalantly confessed to an excited gathering of public officials that he had landed on the planet by accident. It was not, he implied, a very happy accident. "I didn't know where the hell I was," he explained carelessly, in excellent English that awesomely contained the suggestion of a Midwestern twang. "Some kind of trouble with the ship's computer, if you know what a computer is." He suppressed a yawn with the back of his hand and continued, "Anyway, the thing will repair itself by morning and I'll get out of your hair. Too bad I had to land in a populated area and stir up so much fuss, but from the ship this place looked more like an abandoned rock quarry than a city. Now, if it's okay with you, I'll get back to the ship and—" A senator, Fillmore by name, at the opposite end of the table, jumped to his feet. "You mean you had no intention of contacting us? My God, man, don't you realize what this means to us? For the first time, we have proof that we're not alone in the universe. You can't just—" Keita called for silence with an impatient wave of his hand. Come, gentlemen. You're not the only other humanoid race in the galaxy. We don't have time to call on every undeveloped race we happen to run across. Besides, I never did like playing the role of the mysterious alien who appears unannounced from outer space. Primitives always require so much explanation." "Primitives?" exploded the senator. "Why, of all the impudent—" The senator was quieted by a colleague who placed his hand over the offended man's mouth. The presiding officer at the meeting, a General Beamish, arose and addressed the visitor. "We realize that from your point of view this planet has not exactly achieved the cultural or technological level of your, homeland." "You said a mouthful," agreed Keita, who was now cleaning his nails with a pin attached to a United Nations emblem that somebody had stuck to his tunic earlier in the day. "Look," said the general, gamely trying again, "we're not quite as unsophisticated as you seem to think. There are 3 billion persons on this planet, persons who are well-fed, reasonably well-educated, persons who owe allegiance to only one government. We're making great strides technologically, too. Within a decade, we'll be established on the moon, our satellite. Why, even our school children are space-minded." "Sure," said Keita, who had turned in his chair and was now staring out the window. "Nice little place you got here. Say, is there a bathroom around this place? I gotta—" Someone showed the visitor to a bathroom, where to everyone's astonishment he proceeded to remove his clothes and leisurely shower. The meeting was adjourned for 30 minutes. When he had finished his shower, he dressed, walked back into the conference room, waved a cheery goodbye, and before anyone realized what was happening, he had unlocked the door from the inside and closed it behind him. For a full 30 seconds, no one said anything. Then suddenly someone managed to gasp, "My God, what'll we do?" "There's nothing we can do," said General Beamish. There were tears in his eyes. Keita walked all the way back to the ship. It took him 1 hour and 40 minutes, long enough, he hoped, for someone to have scooted ahead and notified the military personnel guarding the area to keep hands off. No one attempted to stop him. He boarded the ship, made himself something to eat, walked to a stockroom and pocketed a defective transistor from an unemptied disposal tube in a corner. 5 minutes later, he reappeared on the platform outside of the airlock. 15 minutes later, he was delivered in a military staff car to the conference room he had left barely 2 hours before. Everyone was transfigured by his reappearance. Beamish looked especially radiant as Keita sat down at the table, pulled the transistor from his pocket, and stated his business quickly. "Look, it's probably no use asking, but I need a repair part for that damned computer. Something's wrong with the automatic repair circuits, and I don't feel like staying up all night to find the trouble." He held the transistor toward them at arm's length. "Frankly, I don't think you'll have much luck reproducing it, but I thought I'd ask anyway." "May I see it?" asked Beamish, leaning forward and eagerly stretching out a hand. Keita seemed to hesitate for a minute, then shrugged his shoulders and dropped the transistor into the general's sweating palm. 3 persons got up from the table and crowded around Beamish, trying to get a look at the alien product. "Well," said Keita, "what do you think? If it's too far advanced for you, don't hesitate to say so. I'll just get back to the ship and start working." Not at all," said a small, white-haired man who had finally wrested the transistor from Beamish. He squinted at the thing through a pocket magnifier. "We'll have it for you by morning, I'm quite sure." "I'm not quite so sure," said Keita, yawning, "but I need the sleep anyway. See you here at 8 in the morning." He yawned again, got up from the table, and walked out once more through the door. When Keita reappeared in the morning, Beamish ushered him into the conference room with a hearty clap on the back. When everyone was seated, he pulled a small jewel box from a pocket and handed it ceremoniously to Keita. "I already ate breakfast," said Keita, setting the box on the table. No, groaned Beamish. "That's not food. Open it up, man." Keita lifted the box to eye level, squinted at it suspiciously for a moment, then sniffed it. "You're sure?" Yes, shouted a dozen impatient voices. Open it up." Keita shrugged and opened the box. 12 tiny, identical transistors lay gleaming on a bed of black velvet. "Well?" said Beamish eagerly. Answered Keita. "What do you mean, asked Beamish nervously. "I mean it's a silly damn way to pack transistors. But they look like they'll do the job," said Keita, snapping the lid closed. The sighs of relief were heard in the corridor. Keita pushed his chair back from the table and stood up. "I realize that I've put you all to a lot of trouble, and I'd like to offer some kind of payment for your services. But frankly, gentlemen, I don't know how I can—" "Oh, you can, interrupted Beamish excitedly. "What I mean to say is that if you really want to, you can." "How?" "Why, you could provide us with a small amount of information." Beamish looked definitely nervous. "Be more specific, General." Keita was beginning to look grim. "Well, we were thinking, it would be nice if you'd agree to have a friendly chat with some of our people. For instance, an hour or so with our physicists, then maybe a half hour with a few sociologists, and perhaps the same amount of time with the Senators' Committee." Keita closed his eyes and sighed. Okay, boys, but make it quick. Also, let's keep it to 20 minutes for each inquisition. Come on, when do we start? Now?" The scientists were the first, and the easiest. He gave them just enough information to whet their appetites, just enough to plant the suggestion that it took a great deal of tolerance and patience on his part to hold an interview with such backward people. "Gentlemen, I'd love to explain the principle of the neutrino drive, but frankly I don't know where to begin. You just don't have the mathematics for it." He didn't bother to add that neither, did he? "Yes, of course. I'm sure I understand what you're getting at. My God, why shouldn't I? Even a child can understand those equations." "You call that a representation of the mass-energy constant? No offense, old man, but I'm afraid you're going to have to start all over again. Invention doesn't take the place of research, you know." The social scientists were next. "As I explained a moment ago, we are heterosexual and live an organized community life, but not in any cultural context that could be explained by the term. You might say that our cultural continuum, although the term for us is quite meaningless, is a function of an intricately structured social organism with institutional coordinates that are largely internalized. Do you follow me, gentlemen?" They certainly did not. But the Senators' Committee, as usual, got the information it wanted. Senator Humper. "Now, young man, you claim that your base is on one of 3 inhabited planets of Aldebaran. You also claim that in the known universe there are 1,200 or more inhabited worlds, all welded together in a kind of super-united nations. Did you or did you not state as much?" Keita. "Uh-huh." Humper. "Well, now it appears that we're getting someplace. Tell us, how does each planet manage to qualify for membership in this organization?" Keita. "Why, they have to pass the test, of course." Humper. "Test? What test?" Keita. "The Bruxelles-Hooker-Gall test. We administer it to anybody who seems to be qualified." Humper. Tell us, young man, just exactly what sort of test is this? An intelligence test?" Keita. "Yes, you might call it that, although it has a number of sections. Actually, Gall has divided it into 3 parts. Humper. "I see. Well, what kind of parts?" Keita. "Well, let's see. First, there's the fuel test." Humper. "Fuel test?" Keita. "Let me explain. All very simple, really. Let's take the case of a planet that seems to be qualified for Federation membership in every respect but one. They don't have interstellar flight. Now, since membership imposes duties requiring commercial, diplomatic and scientific intercourse between member worlds, the applicant must be able, within a comparatively short time, to engineer its own transportation. Follow me?" Humper. Yes, go on." Keita. "Well, since the biggest technological stumbling block for most planets in such a situation is the development of the necessary fuel, we'll help them along. In other words, we give them the fuel test. We supply a sample quantity of Z67As, our standard thermonuclear power source. If the applicant, working with a sample, is able to reproduce the fuel in quantity, then that's it. They've passed that portion of the test, and at the same time have developed the means for interstellar flight. Follow me? Humper. Yes, of course. Now how about the second part of the test? Keter. Oh yes, that's the weapons section. Humper. I'm sorry, I'm afraid I didn't hear you. I thought you said weapons. Keter. I did. You see, it's a matter of self-defense. There are a number of primitive worlds that have developed interstellar flight, but have not achieved the cultural and social levels that would qualify them for membership. As a result, they become rather nasty about this exclusion and devote themselves to warring against any Federation ship that comes within range. You'd call them pirates, I think. Anyway, the Federation patrol keeps them pretty well in hand, but occasionally the Blues, that's our nickname for them since all other ships are blue, do manage to waylay a ship or raid a Federation planet. So naturally, every ship must carry suitable armament. The standard equipment is an R-37AX computer missile, even more complicated for an applicant to manufacture than the reactor fuel. Therefore, we provide a sample missile along with our blessings. The rest is up to the applicant. Humper. And the last part of the test? Keter. Oh, that's genetic. We require a specimen, a woman from the applicant's world. She's taken to a Federation laboratory, evaluated genetically, physiologically, psychologically. Our people are able to extrapolate the future racial and to some degree cultural development of the entire planet after about 2 weeks' works. Needless to say, the entire process of testing is painless. The subject is made as comfortable as possible, and after the test period, the specimen is returned as quickly as possible to her home world. Humper. Well now, don't you think, after what you've seen of us, that we might possibly qualify? At least qualify to take the test? I'm sure you will be surprised. Keter. Oh no, you don't. I fulfilled whatever obligation I had by answering your questions. That was the agreement, remember? Information exchanged for the transistors. Now, gentlemen, if you'll excuse me. Keter allowed himself to be delivered back to the ship in a staff car. Beamish and several others were on hand to see him off. He shook hands all around, a custom which amused him immensely, since the same act meant something tremendously different in most other parts of the universe. Back in the ship, he walked to his cabin, stripped off his clothes, showered, ate, dressed again. Going into the control room, he checked a number of detectors, found no evidence that any Blues were hunting for him, left the control room and walked back to a supply room. Here he selected a plastic vacuum solenoid from a rack, hefted it in one hand for a moment, then deliberately let it drop to the floor. He picked it up, squinted at it, then walked out to the airlock. General Beamish was delighted. Everyone was delighted. "No trouble at all," said Beamish, who had already made a phone call that had galvanized 2,000 scientists and technicians into action. "We'll have it for you in no time." "I certainly hope so," said Keter. Some of the flippancy had left him, and it was apparent that this new bid for assistance was causing him considerable embarrassment, for a short time anyway. "Yes, sir," said Beamish, grinning. "Glad to be of help. In fact, we're flattered that you'd let us, primitive as we are, help at all. We primitives don't often have an opportunity to do this sort of thing, you know." Beamish believed in rubbing while the rubbing was good. The solenoids, 40 in all, were delivered the following morning. They were packaged in a small black box lined with velvet. This time Keter made no comment about the packaging. Instead, he rose from his chair in the conference room, tucked the box under an arm, and addressed the group. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to know just how much I appreciate this favour. Evidently, I misjudged your level of technology, and for this I apologize. I don't know how I can repay you for this latest favour, but if you'd like, I'll be glad to formally submit your planet's application for Federation membership as soon as I return to Aldebaran." "When will that be?" asked Senator Humper unceremoniously. "Oh, about 10 of your years, at a guess." 10 years? My God, man, can't you do something sooner?" "Well, I suppose. I could administer the first 2 parts of the test myself. Why, yes, I suppose I could drop off your samples and your specimen at the Federation branch laboratory in Andromeda." "Wonderful," shouted Beamish. "When do we begin?" He was genuinely awed when 3 weeks later they began loading enormous quantities of Z-67As into his ship. He did not check the stuff, but had no doubts that it was, atom for atom, identical to the sample of fuel he had given them. Their R-37AX computer missiles arrived the same afternoon. There were 400 of them. He selected one at random and had it taken into the ship's laboratory. Here he ran a number of routine tests. The missile was not identical to the sample. They had made a number of improvements in the circuitry. Keita reflected grimly that a race such as this would probably be able to deduce a launching and firing system for the thing, would probably have the planet ringed with launching stations within weeks. If the Blues had picked up a trace of him, he reflected, they would be atomized before they got within 500,000 miles of the planet. The specimen for genetics, which he had almost forgotten about, arrived an hour before he was scheduled to depart. He was stunned again. She was undoubtedly the most attractive woman Keita had ever set eyes on. "Oh, I'm so excited," said the young lady, in a voice slightly suggestive of the Virgin on the way to the sacrifice. "I'm excited too," said Keita honestly. In the control room, Keita set a course for Arcturus. He then tripped a lever which fed a month's supply of the Earthman's fuel into the ship's almost empty reaction chambers. Another lever fed 50 computer missiles into 50 completely empty launching racks. He checked the detectors, but found no trace of the blue ships of the Federation patrol. Keita allowed himself the luxury of a sigh. It was a long way to Arcturus, a long, lonely way. Even for a hardened pirate, he reflected sadly. Then he remembered that was why he had asked for the girl. The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past.